Dr. Stephen Hassan, welcome back to Mea Culpa, my brother. It has been a while. Hope you're well. There's so much crazy shit going on in the world. Nobody better than to have you on. So I want to jump right into it. And I just want to start off for a second to talk to you about the Supreme Court. And I know it's a funny topic, but there's really nothing funny that's going on here. Take, for example, Justices Alito and Thomas. The two of them dissented in a 7-2 decision that stopped the Trump administration from deporting migrants without due process. I mean, that should not be something that makes people jump back and say, oh my God, holy shit, right? The question I want to ask you, how did these two justices, sworn to uphold the Constitution, how do they end up writing opinions that sound more like cult manifestos than legal arguments?
Well, my framing is from my research for the Cult of Trump book, and in particular, my reading of a great book by a UK journalist, Gareth Gore, on Opus Dei, the Catholic extremist cult that I've helped people out of for a long time, and how much they were involved with the Federalist Society, feeding money to Leonard Leo, how the Federalist Society was recruiting people over decades from law schools in order to put them on the Supreme Court. And in particular, Clarence Thomas, I'm aware that he was specifically groomed. And I don't know if you remember, Michael, but Ginny Thomas was a former member of the LifeSpring cult. And I actually supervised a ex-member meeting that she spoke about being an ex-member before she married Clarence Thomas. But she loved my work. She wanted me to tell Congress about my book, Combating Cult Mind Control. But then they got recruited and groomed, and she became full-on QAnon. But to answer your question, I go back in my thinking to Peter Pomerapsov's work, who's written about Russian media in particular, and how I remember a book that he wrote, Nothing is true and everything is possible. I could be butchering the name of the book, but he was talking about how Putin controlled the media in Russia to make it appear like there's democracy and make it appear like there's conflict, etc. But it was all stage managed to give the illusion of freedom when there was no freedom. And that's what I believe is happening here in the United States, because, as you know, I believe that we are victims of a Russian coup, recruiting Donald Trump and many, many others in politics. And I think that to jump to the chase, I think that the Supreme Court, the so-called conservative extremist right Supreme Court, who said we have to be literalists to the Constitution, are now taking liberties to say, no, we don't need to follow the Constitution. In fact, maybe we'll give Donald Trump a third term. They haven't said that, but we've heard Bannon say that.
No, Trump has said it himself too.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think we need to focus on understanding that we're in a psychological warfare situation that isn't normal, and people think that it's going to go back to normal, and we now are getting the clue that it's not going to go back to normal. So the issue for me now is, what can good people like you, like me, and so many other courageous people who are speaking out, what can we do to understand psychological warfare and how to combat what they're doing to us using the social media platforms? Because they know what they're doing. They're doing it in a military level style. And the Democrats and the opponents are just like flailing around. Everybody's in a silo, and they're missing the big picture. And so going back to the Supreme Court, I don't think they're just sitting thinking and opining. I think that there's messaging happening of Here's how we're going to do it for this thing or for that thing. And I'm desperately worried.
Well, we were very fortunate in the fact that it became a 7-2 decision within which to put a stop to this deportation and the violation of due process. Personally, I was very happy to see it. I was surprised to see it. But what really shocked me more than even the decision was Justice Alito expressed such anger. He was furious that the ruling came out before he could even finish writing his dissent. But what he really seems angry about, at least to me, is losing control of the narrative. Because that's all that I believe that he really wanted, is to control the narrative, not for himself, not for the Supreme Court, not for the United States of America, but for one man and one man only, right? Is this emotional outburst part of the narcissistic injury that you see in authoritarian cult dynamics?
So I am a mental health professional, and I definitely, wrote a chapter comparing Trump with Jim Jones and Hubbard and Moon, and other authoritarian cult leaders. But as far as Alito's psychology, I all I can say is that now that they've taken power, now we're seeing the inner fissures exposing themselves within the cult of Trump, where egos are in play. And so it is a dynamic to consider, but I'm really not an expert on the individuals on the Supreme Court. I've really been focused more in my 49-year career helping people get out of mind control cults. And as you know, Michael, I was in the Moonies, and that's how I got interested.
Well,
in the
what got me
topic
to
of
read,
framework.
what really got me to come up with this question is really, after reading your book, it was something which to me just seemed, it just seemed like an obvious, it's almost like a rhetorical question if you think about it. So let me ask it to you in a little bit of a different way.
Okay.
You have two Supreme Court justices, Alito and Thomas, defending President Trump's ability to deport migrants en masse without any legal recourse. That's not just bad jurisprudence. It's a dangerous ideology. You all have heard me turn around since I started this podcast 5 years ago. Hard to imagine. 500 million downloads 5 years ago. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not just bad jurisprudence, like I said would happen. It is a bad ideology. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to suppress people's First Amendment constitutional rights. I warn people that what you're going to see is all of a sudden, whether it's ICE, DHS, FBI, marshals, it makes no difference, grabbing, bagging, and tagging individuals, throwing a little black hoodie over their head, tossing them into the back of a Sprinter, and sending them off to someplace that they have absolutely no rights. Whether it's this concentration camp in El Salvador, they have another internment camp in the Panamanian jungle. Trump wants to open up 5 more of these elsewhere in El Salvador. The question I want to ask you, Steve, is, are we watching the court become a doctrinal enforcement arm of the Trump cult? Or you think there's something else going on here?
Well, I think they were put in place before Trump came into power, and I think they're following instructions, frankly, of their masters, and they're not acting as independent Supreme Court justices, which they're supposed to be. And that was part of the problem with the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo and Opus Dei, deliberately picking people, grooming them, indoctrinating them, and pushing them to be nominated by Republican presidents to take over the Supreme Court. And this has been a 50-year project. And this project started before the Soviet Union fell. And I just need to jump in and say, Americans need to understand how bad Putin is and how bad Russia is, because that's, I think, a critical messaging that's missed, where it's pointing at Trump as if he's a mastermind. And I'll state categorically that my well documented research is that his chief of staff, Susan Wiles, was involved with his 2016 run and reportedly was a paid lobbyist by Putin and Xi before she was in charge of his 2016 run. And I think she's the mastermind, not Trump. People keep saying Trump is this and Trump is that. I feel like he's a puppet.
Yeah, I
And
don't remember Susie Wiles being involved heavily in 2016. In fact, I don't remember her really at all. And don't forget, I was there. I started the whole goddamn thing. So, first it was Corey Lewandowski. He got shit canned. After Corey became Paul Manafort, he ran into trouble. He got shit canned. Then comes in Steve Bannon. But while Steve Bannon was at the helm, I also brought in Kellyanne Conway, who came in to be a messenger for Trump, because Trump is so devoid of understanding women's needs and what, and the rights that women, want to keep. And so we brought Kellyanne Conway in as a face of that. But I don't remember Susie Wiles being a top player in there at all. I remember she was there, but she really wasn't a top player. What happened, just so that we're clear on it, what happened is, as the next election cycle came about, remember, Paul Manafort has all sorts of legal issues going on. Roger Stone, all sorts of legal issues going on. Lewandowski, just not somebody who could be trusted. And Steve Bannon had a falling out with a whole group of people that he got pushed to the side. It's funny because while Steve Bannon will sit there and talk about Trump on his podcast and on television any way that he can, he's certainly a cheerleader. The problem, though, is he's not within the inner circle anymore. So who gets left? Well, the Lone Ranger herself, Susie Wiles, who ultimately takes on that position. She's a very level-headed individual. And so what ended up happening is everybody said, oh, great, we finally have an adult in the room. It turns out that she could be the most devious of them all.
Well, that's my understanding. And I interviewed a former Trump campaign person in Florida who said her boss was Susan Wiles, and she also claimed that Susan Wiles and her ex-husband now were paid lobbyists for Putin and Xi, was her information.
Yeah, that I didn't know.
And that the internet had been scrubbed just before she got nominated to find any facts about that connection. And this former campaign person, I'm hesitating to mention her name because she's truly afraid for her life, but she read my book, The Cult of Trump. She said that Susan Wiles was her boss, and that because they had not planned to even win the nomination, they did all these RV vehicles. She said Russia was all involved in funding this, the Cambridge Analytica hack. They had apps, and they created specialized RVs, veterans for Trump, bikers for Trump, etc. And she also was forcibly kissed by Donald Trump, but she moved her head at the last minute from her lips. But she resigned after the Access Hollywood tape because she realized this was a larger pattern here of his bad behavior. But she was shocked that the Mueller investigation never interviewed her because she was in the ground game, 2015 and 16.
Interesting.
So that's my information.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you this then as a follow-up, because, Trump's legal team, they've leaned heavily on the Alien Enemies Act. Now, I want to remind my listeners that the Alien Enemies Act was first became a doctrine in 1798. I mean, that's how far they had to go back to find something that they could use. It was, in essence, a law that was rooted in xenophobia and wartime panic. Question I want to ask you is, isn't this just another cult tactic using ancient or obscure doctrine to justify some current authoritarian control?
Absolutely. So the thing that the public has a hard time wrapping their head around is how malignant narcissists operate and how authoritarian cults operate. Like we've talked previously, and you said that you were not aware of the Russian connection at all. And for me, as a leader in the Moonies in 1974, 5, and 6, because my superior was a right-hand man of Moon, I got to sit in all these leadership meetings where he'd be segregating different parts of the cult and telling each section theirs was the most important mission, and one part didn't know what the other part was working on, etc. But Moon literally said, we're going to infiltrate the Congress. God hates democracy. We have to put a theocracy in. And when we take power, we're going to amend the Constitution and make it a capital offense for people who oppose and don't follow our rules. And as a brainwashed Moonie, I was like, yes, for God, yay, for God. And I'm just seeing what's happening today going, this is my former cult that's still a player, by the way. They have an AR-15 gun factory and gun cult that went around the country with Michael Flynn before this last election, right? Training people for militias to go around and round up the non-cooperative citizens, right? A la Mussolini. And this is my former cult that runs the Washington Times.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, I'll tell you what I find to be amazing, and we're going to go through a couple of people that are currently within Trump's inner circle. I do just want to comment for a second, because you made mention where in our previous conversations I stated, and I still state, I'm steadfast in my comment, which is I don't believe that there was that Trump was involved with Russia in terms of the way people think. Yes, I believe that Russia wanted Trump to win, especially when they realized how easy it is to manipulate him with just the slightest amount of flattery. That's just who he is. They didn't need to fund shit for him. All they needed to do was flatter him. Have Vladimir Putin say that Trump is one of the smartest, best negotiators I've ever met. And that, I don't know if I would want to be on the opposite side of his negotiating tactics. By pumping Trump up for him, you don't even need to pay. It's just a matter of flattery. And I say that because I want to bring in folks like Marco Rubio, right? A guy whose own family fled Cuba as asylum seekers. He is now one of the leaders in Trump's foreign policy push to deport modern day refugees back to authoritarian regimes. I just think it's funny. A guy who Trump attacked mercilessly, the fighting that went on between them, but now he's one of his chief foreign policy pushers. The question I really want to ask you, is this what you would call cult-induced moral inversion?
So that's a good question. My experience as a former victim was I had a mind hack where there was a pseudo identity that was superimposed over the real Steve Hassan in the image of Moon and Hak Jahan. So there was the real me that was suppressed and the cult me that was totally indoctrinated to follow blindly, because of demons possessing me. A lot of what is in the cult of Trump now is demonology, fear, and phobia indoctrination. And if you are programmed for this self to suppress your conscience, suppress your past, even negativize your past, you'll do whatever you're told because you're programmed to obey, because you believe that this is your destiny. And I want to just circle back for a second, Michael, and you know how much I respect you. I put you as a whistleblower and one of the most high-ranking former members of the cult of Trump in my book. But my information is that, and comes from Yuri Shvets and Craig Unger, that he was in the KGB when Donald Trump went over to the Soviet Union, and they recruited him not as an agent but as an asset, and he gave details about where in New York their front was. And so I'm still operating on a different paradigm than your direct experience, but I want your listeners just to hold the possibility that this really has been a Soviet Union / now Putin, who was raised in the cult of the communist Soviet Union, to take down America, its greatest enemy, to neuter us, to show our flaws by exploiting freedoms, by buying off politicians, by dismantling checks and balances. And for me, this is the most logical frame to use. But I'm an action guy, and I want to think about how we can proceed to exploit the fissures and change the messaging, because I believe there'll be millions of ex-MAGA devotees in the weeks ahead. And instead of calling them names, we should be embracing them and welcoming them and turning them on the GOP politicians to make the GOP politicians.
That's what I'm doing right now with Jim Acosta. You ever try launching a podcast with zero experience? Well, let me tell you, it's like being tossed into a cage match with a grizzly bear, blindfolded, wearing clown shoes. I mean, when I started Mea Culpa, I thought to myself, come on, how hard can this be? Well, script writing, logos, production schedules, ad deals, and don't even get me started on the tech setup. I mean, I felt like I was decoding the damn Matrix. If only I had Shopify when I launched this beast. Shopify is the platform behind millions of businesses across the globe, responsible for a whopping 10%, you hear me? 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. And my friends, that's not hype. That's a fact. From big names like Mattel and Gymshark to folks just getting their hustle off the ground, Shopify's got their back. I mean, you want a gorgeous online store? Shopify's got hundreds of sleek, ready-to-go templates that make you look like a design god. And AI tools? Yeah, they've got those too. Writing your product descriptions, jazzing up your images, maybe even making you sound smarter than you actually are. I mean, not naming names or anything, right? I mean, need a marketing squad? Shopify's built-in tools let you hit email, Instagram, TikTok, wherever your customers are scrolling or doom scrolling. And listen, Shopify handles it all. Inventory, returns, international shipping. I mean, they are the ride or die business partner that you never knew that you needed. So if you got a big idea or even a little one and you're ready to turn that dream into a reality, head over to shopify.com/Cohen. So if you want to see less carts being abandoned, it's time for you to head over to Shopify and sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Cohen. That's Shopify, SHOPIFY.com/Cohen. One more time, that's shopify.com/Cohen, where we started this thing called the No Fear Tour. We just had our first here in Manhattan in an off-Broadway theater, which was also through Substack. It was live streamed. And I got to tell you, that's exactly what Jim Acosta and I have been saying, which is you can't constantly just attack somebody and expect that they're going to come to your side, even though they know that you're right. You have to make them want to come to your side. Can I just say something to you going back to Russia for a second?
Sure.
Because I get this a lot from people on social media. Trump is a Russian asset, this one. You know, one thing I hope we can all acknowledge, you, Stephen, myself, and all of my listeners, the Russians lie about everything. The misinformation, the disinformation, the malinformation. I just want people to understand that Trump went over to Russia twice. Once was in the early 90s. He went over with a whole slew of guys here from New York. All right, in the early 90s, like 91 or 93, something like that. And then the next
Not
time
earlier,
was
Michael?
earlier than the 90s. I don't
I
think so.
thought it was the late 80s that he went to Russia for the first time.
I thought it was the beginning of the 90s. But let's just say it's the 80s or the beginning of the 90s. It's still, my point stays
Didn't he
valid.
take out a full-page ad against NATO after his first trip to Russia?
Yeah,
that was in
yes.
the 90s?
Yes, it was in the 90s, I believe. But anyway, my point being, while this took place, then the next time he went over was around 2013, which was for the Miss Universe pageant when he went over there to the Crocus Center. The reason why I think this is important is I want people to understand that when Trump first went over to Russia, it was actually Yeltsin who was in power. Putin wasn't even on the scene. Putin didn't become president until the year 2000. In fact, I think it was March of 2000 that Putin became president. So he wasn't even in the picture. Now, do I think that there was still a desire by Russia to bring down the United States? Absolutely. But the numbers don't fit and the time frames don't fit. But that's neither here nor there. I personally believe that Trump is so enamored by Putin's power, by the fact that you can't get shit done in Russia unless Putin puts his signature on it. And as you know, Trump loves his signature. You cannot do anything there unless Putin's signature is on it. And Putin gets a taste, like a mob boss, of everything. That's what Trump wants, which actually makes a lot of sense if you think about it. While he's sitting here with these stupid tariffs, that's creating a global nightmare, an economic global nightmare. What is he constantly talking about? Oh, this one called me, that one called me, this one wants to come to the negotiating table, everybody wants to talk to me, right? It's almost like this need to be the mob boss, right? Like everybody's going to Michael Corleone. I want to thank you, or Don Corleone, right? This is what he wants. This is what he was taught by Roy Cohen.
Yeah,
right?
no, I'm aligned on that completely with you. And I think he's easy to manipulate through his narcissism for sure. But this move to white Christian, anti-black,
nationalist,
anti-woman, and everything else, this is, I believe, part of a project that I learned from my colleague Dave Troy. Project Russia was to infiltrate the Christian right evangelical movement, to use these organizations for their purposes. And the New Apostolic Reformation is 30 to 40 million Americans in it, and some estimated 900 million worldwide, where people think they're following God, but they're following a person who says they're a prophet or an apostle. And they said, and they're the ones who said to their followers, Trump won the 2020 election. Don't believe the fake media. And all of the evidence is to the contrary, but they are so programmed as cult members to follow their prophet or apostle, they can't allow a doubt because they believe it's demons invading their mind, like I did when I was a Mooney. Same ideology.
So let me ask you this, because in this cult psychology, there's often this willingness to betray your own deeply held personal values in service of your leader. The thing that going back to Marco Rubio and the earlier question I asked you, how does someone like Rubio square his own family's history with his complicity in the exact same oppression that they went through? To me, I don't understand it.
So again, when I was in the Moonies, one of the techniques I was taught was thought stopping, which is a behavior modification technique. In the Moonies, we would say, crush Satan, glory to heaven, peace on earth, true parents, true parents. In other words, you're not allowed to have a negative thought because it's labeled as demonic or satanic. And the absolute key, because I don't believe brainwashing is 100%. I mean, I was a fanatic. I would have killed on command or died on command. But what got me out was my family's love and an accident that got me away from the group long enough to be in the hospital and to reconnect with some of my roots. And what Marco Rubio's family and friends need to be messaging with him and showing him photos and reminding him of the past. Because when you're in a mind control cult, typically another technique besides sleep deprivation is keeping people so busy they don't have time to be reflective and reality test. Another key with mind control victims is if you say a critical thing against the leader, the doctrine, or the policy, it doubles down the cult identity and reinforces it to feel persecuted. But the key to getting to them is explaining brainwashing exists. And in the case of MAGAs, talking about Chinese communist brainwashing and all of the models used by former military intelligence like Robert Lifton, Margaret Singer, and my model, the BITE model, is based on theirs, or pimps and traffickers and how they groom and recruit and indoctrinate people to be sex slaves. They'll talk about that, and that creates a frame to discuss behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control techniques that subverts the person's real self and builds a pseudo self. So, because my experience is most people are good. Most people, they want love and they want trust and they want friends. When you're in a cult, if you deviate, you're going to be tattled on and the hammer's going to come down on you. You realize this. And I've talked to many emigres from the Soviet Union and other dictatorships. It's exactly the same thing.
So, Stephen, how do you understand, for example, somebody as young as Caroline Levitt, right? Trump's press secretary, who I refer to as bullshit Barbie, where she spins every policy, no matter how cruel, she spins it as patriotic. And it's like she does it with such anger and with such ferocity in the way that she presents it. The question I really want to ask you, is this reflective of cult language control? Remember, she's not creating these responses. These are pre-written responses. Many times she's basically reading off of a script or she's memorized the script.
Mm-hmm.
You think that that's reflective of cult language control?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did PR-ish things for the Moonies. I mean, I frickin' fasted for Richard Nixon for 3 days with just water on the Capitol stairs because God wanted Nixon to be president during Watergate. And I hated Nixon before I got recruited into the Moonies. My father, who I thought would be happy that I was fasting for Nixon, was like, Steve, you are right. He's a crook. And I'm like, Dad, God wants him to be president. But I was a true believer. I really accepted the notion that God's spirit was working through Moon for this grand plan to create the Garden of Eden on earth. And critical thinking or my own thoughts, those were immediately taught to be suppressed. And this woman, I don't know her personally, but my guess is that she's been told and rehearsed over and over in front of a camera. Here are the talking points. This is and a lot of what people don't understand is we're emotional beings, us humans. We like to think we're rational, but we're actually very emotional. And a lot of the manipulation that Trump does and the Trump media does is all about emotion manipulation, programming of fear, disgust, hatred. And so what we need to come back to is we live on one planet, and human species has thrived out of trust, not out of fear and hatred and harming our neighbors. And we are close enough to remember the Holocaust. My ex-father-in-law is 97, and he escaped Poland in the sewers as a child. We know what Hitler did, so it's different than the 1930s in Germany. The question is, are we going to listen to the historians who are experts on fascism and authoritarianism and follow their advice? But realizing we're in a social media digital reality now, and that real life for humans isn't pixels. It's really being with people in your family, your friends, in your local community, and not just looking for strangers to follow you on social media.
Yeah. Here's even a question for you. Did you actually fast for 3 full days? Or was it less than that? And how did you feel from it? The reason why I ask is when I was thrown back into solitary confinement on the unconstitutional remand, they didn't
I
give me food for
remember.
they didn't give me food for almost 3 full days. And I got to tell you, you don't realize 3 days is a enormously long time to go without food. I mean, your whole body shuts down. The nausea is just something that, is undescribable. My dad is a Holocaust survivor. And I remember
I now
when I was a
remember that,
young,
of course.
yeah, from Poland, when my dad used to tell me as a young child, when they were escaping and they ended up into Siberia, believe it or not, there were days that they went without food. And he would say to me, he was so hungry. It's a feeling that you should never ever know from. Well,
Right.
as I said to my dad after I was ultimately released by Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, I remember saying to him, all that I kept thinking about when I was so hungry, dizzy, hungry, yeah, the pain in your stomach is just enormous. And I said to him, now I know what you felt like when you were a kid, So he said to me, as of course, the man that he is, I wish to God you never knew that experience,
Right.
right?
Of
But
course.
now it's just something that we share.
So one thing different between my cult experience and you being involuntarily put into jail, protecting your wife from the Trump cult, was I was a true believer at that point, and I was a model Moonie. I was held up by Moon for everyone to follow because Steve would do exactly what he was told or better. So I not only fasted for many 3 days, I fasted for 7 days with no
Wow.
food, working full days. Um, but I thought I was purifying myself. I did drink some water, wasn't without water, but no food, no celery juice or anything like that, just plain water. But
Wow.
it does change you for sure. But it's also part of the demonstration of the devotion of how committed you are to the group. But I want to come back to, I'm very happy you're doing stuff with Jim Acosta. And I'm really been saying to everybody, if you've blocked or muted your family or friend who got into MAGA, it's time to reach out and just say, hey, I miss you. I want you back in my life. And if they say, you cursed me out and called me names, you say, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Can we do a redo? Can we
Mm.
reboot?
So
because
I
I
think the
want.
right way to say is don't turn around and say it that way. Just say, go fuck yourself, right? You were an idiot then and you're an idiot now. And, until you get out of the
Come
cult,
on,
you're still going
Michael.
to be an idiot.
Come
Right?
on, Michael.
And hey, so
Join
so
join the
speak.
deprogramming movement,
Yeah.
the movement to liberate people. Because I tell you, when I came out and my friends who did say things like that just made me feel horrible. Whereas my friends who said welcome home, my next door neighbor baked me chocolate chip cookies. I felt like I needed to come back to Steve Hassan and writing poetry and being Jewish and just being a mensch instead of being a
So
fascist fanatic.
so speaking about Stevens, I want to refer for a quick second to Stephen Miller, right?
Uh,
This is a guy who's behind the curtain, shaping things like immigration policy and so on. Yeah, Stephen Miller's Jewish as well, comes from a family that also Holocaust survivors and so on. This is the same guy who was responsible for pushing not just child separation, but also the very first in 2017, the Muslim ban. The question I want to ask you is, how do cults use figures like Steve Miller, who's not a stupid kid at all?
right.
He's an ideological purist, and they use people like Stephen Miller to keep others in line, and worse, to ramp up extremism. How'd they do it?
So the Nazis used Jews to control other Jews, by the way. But
Yep.
let me just explain that my career of 49 years has basically been either helping people who are exiting cults or having questions about them, helping them to understand how their mind got hacked and recover, or coaching family and friends on how to help a loved one who got radicalized and became a totally different person and got involved with an extremist group. I don't have the experience of how do you design an intervention for millions of people. This I need a lot of help on, but I think the same principles exist. But to answer your question about Stephen Miller, I would, if his father or mother, this is hypothetical because I could never talk about clients anyway, if it was real, if they said, help us get Steve Miller back to us, to think for himself again, I would be researching in detail his profile. I'd want to know important life cycle events. I'd want to know key people in his life. And I'd want to especially give detail to how he got radicalized, how he came to be programmed these extremist beliefs that's completely antithetical to Judaism. And I would design an intervention strategy, coaching family members and friends and the public to how to interact with him. Because I don't know him. And I mentally ill people don't make good cult members, by the way, unless you're the leader.
Right.
They want people who are reliable and trustworthy and who will work long hours and do what they're told. But I'm telling you, Michael, everyone has doubts. Everyone has conflicts. But for each person, there's a unique combination, 3 to the right, 14 to the left. And you have to keep trying different things. And ultimately, if you have rapport, they'll tell you how to get them out. They'll
So let
they'll
me
give
ask
you the clues.
Sure. So this is, I guess, the topic of religious fundamentalism, what you were talking about with Russia going after the evangelicals and so on. Is religious fundamentalism being used as a kind of spiritual coercion inside of this Trump cult? So let me ask you something. Did you consent to having your phone number, your home address, your children's information, and even your Aunt Linda's maiden name sold to some weirdo in a basement? No. Well, too bad, because data brokers already did it. I mean, these creeps buy and sell your info like it's baseball cards or comic books. And guess what? You are the rookie card. But now, right now, you can fight back with DeleteMe. DeleteMe makes it easy, quick, and safe to pull your personal data from hundreds of data broker websites. It's like hitting the eject button on the sketchy parts of the internet without having to fake your own death. Look, I've had my name dragged through the mud, slapped across headlines, and used as a punchline in 7 different congressional hearings. So I know what it feels like to have your life on display. So yeah, privacy, it matters to me. And if you think your info isn't out there, well, let me tell you something. You're wrong. It is. So take control of your data and keep your private life private. So here's the move. Get 20% off your DeleteMe plan by texting COHEN, that's Cohen, to 64000. That's Cohen, COHEN, to 64000. Again, Cohen to 64000. Message and data rates may apply, but being left alone, priceless. When I asked this question, obviously I had in mind MAGA Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House,
Yes.
who in essence is constantly talking about religion, though he uses religion to justify unconstitutional acts as biblically consistent,
Right.
though they are not.
Right.
How do you parse this?
This is straight out of my work of helping people get out of religious cults, is to understand what are the teachings of Jesus? What does the New Testament actually teach? Mike Johnson is a Seven Mountain Dominionist. This is not Christian teachings at all. And it's a co-option of actual scripture. And that's another thing that I want to see amplified are Christians who are for separation of church and state and who love Jesus and know what the Bible says about taking care of the least in my kingdom. You take care of me, and take care of the immigrants and the poor and the sick. So what I'm trying to absolutely state, and I put it in my book, these are authoritarian mind control cults that the media has gotten wrong to label them as Christian evangelicals, because Christian evangelicals look at them as they've been co-opted by a false prophet or by Satan himself, because they're not. Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar what Caesar." Stay out of politics. He said it's harder for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven, right? And now we have Paula White and all these people who are saying, give me money, buy this and buy that, and you'll be blessed. This is not Christianity. It's a co-option of spiritual values and of love and of truth and of kindness, and do not to others what you don't want done to yourself. So I really want those people of faith who understand the essence of the Abrahamic religions is love. Open your tent to the stranger in the desert. Give them food and water. Don't treat them as enemies, etc. We need to get back to values, human values that enable us to live a fulfilling life versus what is being put into our brains largely in the digital world, to manipulate us and to make us feel hopeless, or to make us feel this black and white, us versus them, good versus evil programming. And I do think that we have we're in a psychological warfare condition, and folks like yourself, I'm very grateful that you asked me to be on again on Midas Touch, because I really think we need to get our messaging in a much more directed, functional way that's actually going to help us gain power over time to counter this monstrosity.
What's interesting is people have a very misguided perception or an understanding of the intellect of these folks that are actually in a cult. People think that if you're in a cult, must mean that you're stupid, that you're easily manipulated, that you don't have a sharp and a keen mind. That's not true at all. And all you have to do is It's not true at all. In fact, I want to just be very clear about this. Trump manages to extract total loyalty from people who clearly know better. Not because they have some religious background in them, but they're actually smart. I mean, take someone like J.D. Vance, right? He went to Harvard. Rubio went to Harvard. Alito, Supreme Court Justice, is clearly no dummy. I just want to ask you, explain to my audience, what psychological mechanisms keep them locked in? You know, I hate it when people say, oh yeah, of course they're part of a cult, they're stupid. Not true at all. In fact, some of them are wickedly, wickedly smart.
That's my experience. So very briefly, and people say, Steve, you're a PhD, you should talk to people at an 8th grade level, but I'm going to talk to you social psychology for 1 minute. We have cognitive biases in our unconscious. And what you said before expresses it perfectly. When humans look at other humans doing things, they tend to over-attribute personality variables, or what's known as dispositional variables, and ignore the social context and the social psychological variables. What we know about the human species is we're social beings. We take in information from those we hang around with a lot unconsciously. So why did Steve get in the Moonies? He was weak, he was stupid, whatever. I skipped 8th grade. I was reading postgraduate level when I was 8 years old. And I have 2 masters and a PhD. And I'm telling you, I was totally brainwashed. But to answer your question, one of the important things that I based my bite model on is called cognitive dissonance theory. And this was Leon Festinger in the 50s studying a UFO cult when the flying saucer didn't show up on the mountaintop when predicted. People believed more. And he was like, why could people, they should have been disillusioned and leave. And he came up with this theory that said that humans like in their identity to be congruent. They like their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to line up. And if you can get a human to do an extreme behavior, they rationalize it, to justify it, to feel good about it. And that's a feature of understanding how cults groom people through a lot of little increments to do behaviors that are out of the normal more and more till they get to a certain point where then they get indoctrinated. Maybe it's a mystical experience. Maybe you're Elon Musk doing ketamine and a beautiful Russian hypnotizes you, woman, tells you that your future is Mars, and you've got to hack the U.S. government's most secret computers and give it to Russia. But nevertheless, the point I'm trying to get at is that we now know a lot about how the mind works, how neuroscience works, how social psychology works. And those who understand how to maximally use it in an ethical way are going to win this war. And right now, we're not winning. We're in,
No, we are not.
reactive mode, going, I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe they're doing that. But they have the people who are in the power positions with the resources and the money don't understand to name the disease that's afflicting us and know there's a cure. And how do you make it happen?
Truth be told, they all want to be mini Donalds. They want to have that cult-like personality. Elon Musk doesn't have it. Steve Miller doesn't have it. Caroline Levitt doesn't have it. Marco Rubio doesn't have it. Shady Vance doesn't have it. None of them do. By the way, I think the movie you were referring to is like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was sort of predicated off of that individual, the one who had the cult, and that they went on top of a mountain, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think so, because in the movie there was a real alien, and this was
I understand they had to make it more
cult.
right. They had to
This
make
was
it
an
more.
actual 1957 UFO cult run by a woman named Mrs. Keach, who got these doctors and people to give up their money, but they were evacuating the Earth Why
I don't
would
know.
they need to give their money to a human if they're
Sounds right. Sounds right to me, right? Meanwhile, Dr. Haas, let me ask you this, right? As the hour comes to an end, I have one last question for you. How do we get people out of these cults, especially those with the power who are hurting others in the process? How do we actually get through to them? And it's not, in my opinion, and mine is worthless compared to yours, by opening up our arms and our hearts and baking them cookies and so on. We are in such a bad place right now. The divisiveness, the hatred, the winner take all ideology. How do we get them out?
So again, because my career has been based on helping one family at a time, I can tell you that getting to the family and friends who have witnessed the radicalization of their father, their mother. I remember you telling me your wife didn't like you getting involved with Trump and your
No.
kids had problems, right? It would be coaching them how to have conversations, not one knockout punch, but conversations to prod reality testing. And the key is my influence continuum, and you can download it from Freedom of Mind. You can put up a chart in this recording if you want. These are the values of ethical influence. These are the values of authoritarian mind control, behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. Teaching them that, and then engaging them. I'd like you to watch this video on Nexium that's on HBO about this group. I'd love to get your opinion and watch it with them. Pause it. How could somebody agree to be a slave and have their groin tattooed,
Yeah, burned.
right? But there's so many good documentaries about mind control cults. But the idea is, with MAGA people, Chinese communist brainwashing, let's unpack it. Let's understand how they were doing it with Mao, and pimps and traffickers. And top labor and sex trafficking experts love my model because it explains force, fraud, or coercion, which is what I did my doctoral dissertation on, is how we can update the legal system to understand mind control. I'm telling you, as a former member, there are millions of ex-members now out. We could be amplifying their messages to normalize this phenomenon to the MAGA people. The more people that you're engaging with who are in a cult where you're warm, you're respectful, you're curious, you're asking questions, that's the most powerful technique, not persuasion through facts. Questions. I'm curious, what do you think of this? What about this? And wait. And that's
not a Louisville Slugger to the ankle. No, that's
no,
just not going to work.
not at all. But Sarah Silverman got a Trump troll, David Weissman, who I put in the book, out because I think it was on Twitter, he was trolling her and she said, "Oh, you're a veteran. Thank you for your service." And he was blown away that she complimented him. And then she said, "So you're a veteran. You must have ideas for how we can stop these shooters from going into our schools and killing our children." He was so moved that a celebrity was asking his opinion, and he realized he not thought about it. What would he do to prevent? He was just doing what he was indoctrinated to say, and it got him out of the cult. It works.
That's what we need to do. It sure does. Steve, thank you so much, my brother. Again, you make us smarter every time I speak to you. Appreciate you. My listeners appreciate you.
And we need you, Michael. So thank you for staying strong and being courageous and speaking your truth.
That's all really I know important. What to do. Stephen, thank you, my brother. Thank you, pal.